Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video and talk about the up and coming fight that apparently has just been recently announced for a championship fight that I believe is going to happen at 154 pounds between that and Mr. Errol, the Truth Spence Jr., and of course, that is Sebastian Fundora. Of course, this is a very particularly interesting fight because Sebastian Fundora, he's coming off of a unification win, at least somewhat over that of Tim Tszyu, where, I thought that Sebastian Fundora probably had just won the fight, but Tim Tszyu gave a very tough fight, even regardless of the cut above his eye, which clearly, was, or not on his eye, I believe it was actually on his forehead. But clearly, I do believe that Tim Tszyu was probably somewhat limited within that fight, but Tim Tszyu is also going to have another opportunity later on this year. I believe even on the Terrence Bud Crawford undercard, I believe it's on that, where Tim Tszyu, he will have a fight against that of Virgil Ortiz. And that's going to be a very big revelator of who is going to be the better fighter and who is going to be the future of the 154-pound weight class. And that is not going to be an easy fight for either of them, but especially that of Tim Tszyu. That's going to be a very difficult fight. So we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, Errol Spence Jr. versus Sebastian Fundora, they have been set up to fight. Of course, a lot of people, they are excited about this fight. And of course, some people believe that this is kind of a duck on the side of Mr. Sebastian Fundora because he didn't go after that of Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford. But just in my personal view, I don't think that this was the wrong move whatsoever. I don't think that it was the wrong move for that of Sebastian Fundora. I don't think that it was the wrong move, certainly for Errol Spence Jr. I don't think that it was the wrong move of the manager to try to get Sebastian Fundora this fight. And just as the manager stated, and I believe that the same manager who manages Sebastian Fundora also manages that of David Benavidez. I think that he stated, and if I'm wrong about that, someone correct me, but I think he stated that at this current moment in time, that as his promoter, that it's his job to get him the most amount of money and that of the biggest fights out there. And I agree with that. In my view, if you're the manager of Sebastian Fundora, you want to take this Errol Spence Jr. fight because there's going to be a big Mexican fan base in that of Texas. And of course, Errol Spence Jr. already has the following within that of Texas because I believe he's from Dallas, Texas. So this fight is going to sell very big in my personal view. And I think that this was really the right move for both of them. As for Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford, of course, he's kind of fighting an opponent to where we really don't know how good he actually is. We know that DontaesBoxingNation, that he's going to try to hype him up to be the next Gennady Golovkin to make sure that the opponent is as glazed as possible, even if he's nowhere near on the same level as a Gennady Triple G Golovkin. And maybe he is, who knows? But we really don't know enough about him because he's only had a total of 11 fights. And if we are going to go there, one of his most recent fights was against a draw against a fighter to where we don't really know that guy, or at least he's not a super high profile level fighter. So in my view, to compare him to a Gennady Golovkin is a little bit ridiculous, but that's not going to stop Dante's Boxing Nation. That's not going to stop overall a good opinion, or that's not going to stop facts getting in the way of an emotional opinion. So it is what it is. But anyways, let's get into the video. Let's see what Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation has to say, and I'm going to talk about the fight. Also, let me state this. There has been some audio issues a little bit recently within my videos. I am trying to fix it the best way possible, but I've tried certain mics even on the computer, and at times the audio sounds even a little bit worse than what it did before. So I have to be a little bit careful and wary to see what's going to work, but we'll see what ends up happening there. So hopefully the audio at least sounds okay. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what he has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So some pretty good breaking news. Finally, Errol Spence versus Sebastian Fundora is agreed upon. It turns out everything Fundora's promoter was saying was a lie because Terrence Crawford was trying to pursue this fight, and Fundora's promoter, he made it very clear that it wasn't happening. He even got contacted by Saudi Arabia saying that they had a big offer for him to fight Terrence Crawford. And he said, we can't negotiate any fights while my fighter is injured. So he won't be able to talk about fighting anyone until like October or December. This is what he said. Now we find out that Errol Spence and Fundora are damn near a done deal. This is further proof that Sebastian Fundora and his promoter Sampson, they never wanted any smoke with Crawford. Not to mention Sampson, he already had.
Well, I think that they took a look at the options on the table, and I think that Sebastian Fundora, that he realizes that right now that Errol Spence Jr., that would potentially be the more winnable fight, and not only the more winnable fight, but a fight that is a fight that makes sense in terms of marketability. I mean, Terrence Bud Crawford is one of those fighters. He's one of those all-time great fighters to where you don't really want to fight that guy because not only because of his pure skill and because of how dangerous he is, like he could literally potentially end your career. But on top of that, Terrence Bud Crawford is a guy to where it's like he doesn't really have great marketability. He doesn't really have the type of personality to be a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or a Manny Pacquiao or or someone like that or a Canelo Alvarez. He's not someone that's quite as marketable as those guys. He's not someone that usually has the same amount of fan base. Now, Crawford, I'm sure, still does have a great fan base because his fight numbers do decently well, at least when you talk about streaming. But in terms of the pay per views, they've always underwhelmed, including the Errol Spence Jr. fight. That fight really was supposed to do, probably, that fight was supposed to do, I believe, probably over 1 million pay per view buys, probably at least 1.2 million pay per view buys. And that was for a complete unification, and it didn't even do 900,000. So once again, Terrence Crawford, even as great of a fighter as he is, he just doesn't have that. He has pretty much every other quality, but he doesn't have the personality. He does not have that of the marketability of some of the other all-time great fighters. It just is what it is. And on top of that, Errol Spence Jr., he's a guy that brings a very entertaining style. I think that Crawford brings a very entertaining style as well. But I think a lot of people realize that this is going to be a war, and that this is not just going to be a confirmed, a confirmed result. I mean, the Crawford, result, of course, wouldn't be confirmed either. But I think that a lot of people are wondering where Errol Spence Jr. is going to be. And I think that this is going to make both fighters a little bit bigger as a result. I think that this fight is going to do very well. And I think that there's a lot of people excited for this fight. I think that there would be more people excited for this fight than what there would be a Fundora versus Crawford fight. I could be wrong about that, but I doubt it. But anyways.
Admitted that Crawford was the best fighter in the world. Someone else who acknowledges that Errol Spence is the best fighter in the world is Errol Spence. But even though these are two fighters,
I think you mean Terrence Crawford, but I understand what you mean.
That don't believe they can beat Terrence Crawford, this definite.
Once again, isn't it very interesting that Alexander Usyk hasn't been mentioned once within their videos? In terms of being debatably the number one pound per pound fighter in the world, not one time. not even once. Isn't that very interesting how they haven't talked about that? I already told you guys that's the reason why the LDBC and new media, they had no interest talking about that fight whatsoever, because it wasn't going to mean anything good for them in the first place. Either Usyk was going to be debated as the number one pound per pound fighter and one of the clear top 30 to top 20 all-time greats within the sport, greater than Holyfield, greater than Mike Tyson, greater than some other all-time great heavyweights or cruiserweights, and hands down looked at as one of the all-time great cruiserweights. So what does that mean if Alexander Usyk is looked at as as for sure the greatest cruiserweight to move up the heavyweight of all time? What does that mean? It means that he's looked at as greater than Evander Holyfield. What does that mean? That means that since they place Holyfield very highly within their ranks, more than likely, certainly within the top 50, if not even within the top 30 or top 20 of all time, if not even close to the top 10, what that means is that Usyk would have to be there as well. And right now, they're not super happy about that. That's why they're not talking about it. And I guarantee you that if you were to ask one of these guys, do you have Usyk above Evander Holyfield? Do you have Usyk, above certain other all-time great fighters? They would say no. And they would come up with some other bullshit excuses. Oh, well, Usyk doesn't have the amount of fights for that. Oh, Usyk doesn't have overall the resume for that. He beat an overrated Tyson Fury. He beat, heavyweights that, this isn't looked as the most skilled heavyweight generation of all time. They come up with some excuse. But that's why you're not hearing any words about Alexander Usyk, even though right now you could easily debate him as the undisputed number one pound per pound fighter. You easily could. You could. Right now you could debate Crawford. You could debate Usyk. You could possibly debate Inoue. And you also could possibly debate Canelo Alvarez. Any one of those fighters you could debate.
Makes for a great match. We get to see what Errol Spence has left at a higher weight class. But the way Errol Spence is talking right now, it sounds like he doesn't really have too much motivation to continue fighting, because he actually just posted, after he announced this news, he posted this might be his last fight. That's not a good sign. But the reality is, even if Errol Spence does want to retire, it's going to be hard for him to retire because they're going to keep throwing money at him. And unless Errol Spence has some major, I'm talking about some serious investments, he's going to have no choice but to keep fighting. Not to mention, if he wins this fight, he will most likely be pressured to fight Terrence Crawford if Crawford doesn't move up to 168 and fight Canelo in this very next.
And that's going to be interesting because I'm not quite sure if Crawford would really want to have a rematch against Errol Spence, but I'm sure that if it was for the unification of 154, I'm sure that he'd be willing to do it. We'll see. But, is this Dante's way of saying that Errol Spence doesn't have a whole lot of motivation for fighting anymore? Is this his way of trying to be truthful, or is this his way of trying to tear down credit for Sebastian Fundora just in case Sebastian Fundora were to win? Because because he's a little bit bitter that the Terrence Bud Crawford fight didn't happen. Once again, it's just very interesting who Dante and a lot of these other channels and a lot of these other guys, who they're willing to give credit to, and what standards they put out there and what narratives they put out there depending on the fighter. Like when it came to Canelo Alvarez, when he defeats any fighter, because he's an actual threat to the number one pound per pound spot, every time he defeats a fighter, they're too young, or they're too small, they're too old, or they already lost, they already got knocked out, they're coming off of their worst performance, and they used to state the same thing with Vasily Lomachenko. So the question is, why are they not stating that with Vasily Lomachenko now that George Kambosos, now that he knocked him out, and George Kambosos has already lost once in his career, actually twice in his career, to Devin Haney, and he was coming off of a controversial decision over Maxi Hughes. You won't hear anything right now that Lomachenko looked bad, or that Lomachenko beat a George Kambosos that maybe was not debatably the same. You know why that is? Because they know that the Shakur versus Vasily Lomachenko fight could potentially happen next, and they need to make it seem like Vasily Lomachenko right now is in the peak of his career, because right now Vasily Lomachenko is not a threat to being the number one pound for pound fighter. Once again, that's how they operate.
Next fight. So we'll see what Errol decides to do. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out.
But I just thought that was very particularly interesting. Personally, do I like the fight? Yes, I do like the Errol Spence versus Sebastian Fundora fight. But once again, very interesting of Dante's take on it. And I believe that I had a person, the same Crawford is going to whoop Canelo, I believe, that dude. He stated overall that, you're kind of doing the same thing as Dante, with your biased opinion and all that sort of stuff. Well, listen, I mean, if you believe that I have a biased opinion, that's up to you. At the end of the day, within my videos, all I can tell you is that I try my best to be as logical and objective, and non-biased as possible. We're all going to have a certain amount of biases just with our perspectives. It depends on your demographic. It depends on your age group. It depends overall, perhaps maybe on which styles you prefer. We're all going to have slight biases, but I try my best overall, once again, to try to limit that, of course. We're all going to have some sort of cognitive bias, whether we realize it or not. But I try to be, logical and objective, basically to the max as possible. Never going to be 100%, but I at least, I try to be, it as much as humanly possible. But anyways, when it comes down to it, like I stated, this is going to be interesting. And of course, Crawford, he has his fight next against, Israel Madrimov, I believe. That one Uzbekistan fighter. Do I believe that he's the next Gennady Golovkin? No, I don't. But we'll see what happens. He seems like an okay fighter, but we'll see. We'll see. It'll be interesting. But this fight I actually love. I think that this is a great fight. I think that this fight is better than the Terrence Bud Crawford situation or the Terrence Bud Crawford fight, because I think that it's more marketable, and I think that it's better for both fighters' careers, and I think that it's looked at as more of a debatable competitive fight. I think that it's looked at as a fight that either man could win, and that if Sebastian Fundora is able to have another feather in his cap over Errol Spence Jr., then it'll make the Crawford fight even a little bit bigger than what it would have been previously. Because I think that a lot of people right now, they take a look at Fundora, and I don't know whether they really think to take a look at him and say, is this dude for real? Or is he, maybe not quite what he was, kind of hoofed out to be, because he did kind of get a bit lucky over Tim Tszyu. The fact that he ended up getting a cut very early on in that fight, so we'll see. So I think that this Spence versus Fundora fight actually is the perfect fight. I think that the Crawford fight is perfect after this. Of course, if Crawford is interested, still after the Madrimov fight. Of course, if he's able to get past Madrimov, which I assume he'll be able to do. But we'll see. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this. Thank you all so much for watching. Talk to y'all later.